Welcome to the Automation World Get Your Questions Answered podcast, where we connect with industry experts to get the answers you need about industrial automation technologies. I'm David Greenfield, Editor-in-Chief at Automation World, and today we're speaking with Tim Gaus, Smart Manufacturing Business Leader at Deloitte Consulting, to learn more about Agentic AI use in manufacturing. Now, I wanted to have this discussion with Tim because there's a good bit of confusion about AI use in industry, not just because its widespread deployment is relatively new to industry, but to clarify the different types of AI used in industry. And I'm pointing this out because I've been in a few discussions where people were dismissive of AI in general because of the potential for hallucinations and incorrect responses from wide platform generative AI technologies. Basically, some of these people were downplaying the benefits of AI-powered data analytics because they were misconstruing the different types of AI technologies. And now we're hearing not just about AI data analytics and generative AI chatbots or co-pilots, but agentic AI. So thanks for joining me to discuss this, Tim, and to help clear this up for our audience.
Thanks, David. I will do my best to dive into this very interesting and a bit challenging topic.
So, let's start by just explaining what agentic AI is and how it differs from generative AI chatbots and AI-powered data analytics that our audience is likely a bit more familiar with.
Sure. So let's start with the difference between agentic AI versus generative AI. And it is actually a different, though, evolution, I would say, of generative AI. Generative, I think of it as something that creates content that didn't previously exist based on historical things that have been fed into it. So it has the ability to understand context of a question. It can reference a large swath of information that it's been trained upon and generate something for you to answer that question. But it's really in that way a little bit broad and to your point, can be prone to hallucinations. Agentic AI is much more problem solving. So it's not necessarily creating content just broadly. It's specifically trying to solve a problem or answer a question with facts, which is just a different way that you can use this technology, but I think something that makes it much more fit for purpose for our manufacturing environment. Doesn't mean, by the way, that it's completely free of the challenges you saw with generative AI, because it still has some of the same underlying technology. But as we kind of go through this conversation, we can talk a little bit how that de-risks as we kind of move into this agentic world. And the last piece, as you mentioned, by the way, which is critically important, is don't lose sight that there's this whole other broad swath of really interesting things that's just AI. And that's could be machine learning, that could be deep learning. That's where I'd say we as manufacturers have been spending a lot of time over many years, have some really rich models that are out there, and still is where I'm thinking I still see the highest current examples of ROI. But it is now starting to merge all these things together that it gets really interesting. So to broadly recap, classic AI, predictive deep learning, generative AI, creating that new content, agentic AI, moving to problem solving.
Thank you for explaining that, Tim. Now, most AI technologies for manufacturers like the chatbots and data analytics that you mentioned, are part of other software platforms or applications. Is this the case with Agentic AI too, or is this something manufacturers will apply separately?
I think you're going to find a bit of both in this situation, but and I think we'll probably touch on a little bit on single agent versus multi-agent models. In general, what I would say is a lot of the power that agentic AI will provide to manufacturers is when you're cutting across multiple sources of truth, which means multiple systems. So by that nature, I think you're going to find a lot of the agentic AI to sit above any single piece of software that absolutely will work with and consult specific agents for that software. So said differently, you may have a agent that's specific to your ERP system that may be communicating with a broader agent to answer your broader manufacturing questions. So it's a little bit complex there, not straightforward, but I would say the real power is going to be when you're cutting across systems, not tied to one individual system.
And you referenced single agent and multi-agent AI, and I think you kind of explained it a little bit, but could you explain that a little further about those terms, what they mean, and what it means for use of agentic AI in a manufacturing setting?
Sure. So a single agent is, as it sounds, one thing that has been built to answer or solve a problem. And in fact, some of the early things that Deloitte did on this whole journey when we started off with generative AI is very quickly move into a single agent solution. And with that, you can answer very complex problems. So you can say, for example, you have a piece of your equipment is down. You can say, what is the error code? When's the last time that was maintained? Who is the person that maintained that asset? What operator is running on third shift last Tuesday? You can start to ask like very broad questions because the agent is able to go and kind of contextualize all this information and come back with those type of questions. The problem with that single agent approach, though, is as you can tell just from that quick example I showed you, it gets to be very complex and very unwieldy very quickly. So you start to get this bloat into that agent where you could try to answer those questions, but the processing time and the accuracy just goes down, which is why for agentic AI, we feel strongly that it's going to go into a very multi-agent mode very quickly, where you have agents that are very fit for purpose, and then an orchestration agent that sits over the top. So for example, in that one I just gave you, rather than having one agent trying to go out to all those individual spots and solve those questions that as a common answer, you'll have that answer come in. One agent may go out to your MES, one agent may go out to your time system, one agent may go out to your production records, your historian, and then that orchestration agent has asked each of those little underlying agents, what'd you come back with? And then you kind of get the consolidated answer. So it's just a different way of kind of using smaller, more fit for purpose agents with an overlay orchestrator to answer the human context questions that you're trying to solve or problem you're trying to solve.
Thanks for clarifying the differences between those two. So what are the main activities in manufacturing that you see agentic AI having the most impact on in the near term, at least?
In the near term, I believe this is going to really revolutionize or increase our ability to do continuous improvement. I find a lot of my clients are struggling with having enough resource and frankly enough hours in the day to get down to true root cause and resolve problems as they occur. So too often we're relying on a static dashboard, a bunch of data that we shove into Excel to try and do some quick analysis. And quite frankly, it's just not as effective, in part because it takes a long time. With this as agentic AI, I would expect that these agents are, one, more tuned to proactively identify where you're having loss, and then two, help guide to that root cause analysis, that 5 whys, in a much more automated fashion, allowing you to connect these disparate pools of information you already have in across your landscape, but bring it together to a consolidated answer and likely a much stronger and quicker root cause. Now, one thing I think is incredibly important to understand, though, is this is not being done without the human involvement. The human still has to be in the loop on these things because, quite frankly, we're just not to that stage of maturity, and it's going to be a while until we get there. So I talk about this orchestrator agent. I would say the ultimate orchestrator is still the human. So this is just finding a different way for us to interact with our information, with our data, to get to better, more rich outcomes and root causes that allow us to turn it into actions.
And that you make a good point there about the need for the human in the loop and not just ask it a question, it gives you an answer, and then you go act upon it. Can you explain that a little more about how the type of response agentic AI gives and why it's necessary for humans to still be involved in the process?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Lean Six Sigma guy myself, and I feel broadly that these tools, though they're incredibly powerful and allow us to do a lot of the analysis in a much more automated fashion, still don't know how to do the basic core of what it is to be a manufacturer. You still need that human to be asking the right question, or at least making sure that the prompt that you're putting into it is tuned with the manufacturing base that comes along with it. I would say in many cases, we can get to a much richer and better recommendation, but that recommendation still needs to have the intelligence of us and our manufacturing expertise to make sure it makes sense. Quite frankly, with all of these tools, and this was true from classic AI that we started with, absolutely true with generative AI, and has not changed for agentic AI, the quality of the information you are feeding into the model drives the quality output you're getting from it. And as we all know, a lot of our data in the manufacturing world isn't as clean and isn't as secure as what we would like it to be. And so while we're in this process of using these new tools to get to better outcomes, if we have bad data going in and you don't have a human looking at what's coming back out, you likely could get yourself in a bad spot. So I think even more so now as things become apparently easier, it's more important to have the human put that critical eye against the outcomes.
Now, in preparing for this discussion today, I noted that in some information from Deloitte that it's noted that agentic AI can enhance the effectiveness of factory managers by helping fill critical workforce gaps and leaving fewer open ends between processes. Can you explain these two factors there?
Yeah, so I think I touched a little bit around filling in some of the gaps. Just frankly, as we've gotten leaner and leaner operations, that by its nature has reduced the amount of people and time we have to do some of these critical tasks that are important to keeping the continuous improvement wheel and cycles running. But that's just one portion of the conversation. With agentic AI, you also have the ability to generate and take action without having you to go in and do things. So, for example, I can remember when I was a shift supervisor sitting in the office and filling out my shift report and typing a bunch of transactions into a screen. Well, there's a world now where the agentic AI can use the inputs that you're giving to it and automatically go and take that action on your behalf. They go, I want you to go fill in this shift report using this information from this report, from this historian record. It will go into said transaction system and do it on your behalf. So there's a time savings that comes along here as well that I think will also help ease some of the shortages we have in the marketplace from a labor perspective as well. So it's kind of a multifold. You get to do the things that you want to do but don't have the time to do, and you also create some of the time that is spent doing less about high value tasks because you have the things doing it on your behalf.
Now, I also know that Deloitte has pointed out that manufacturers need to revamp their talent recruitment, training, and retention strategies to get the most out of agentic AI. Can you explain that? What do manufacturers need to do here?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. There's a couple different angles that you have to think about as you tackle that problem specifically. One is there's a trust issue that comes with this that has a dual edge to that sword. You need to have a workforce that is willing to adopt and embrace these kind of new types of technology and really use them to make their jobs easier. That's the trust on the good side part. But you also need to make sure your workforce doesn't come in so trusting that because it looks fancy and is on a screen, that they automatically just believe that it's right. Because as I mentioned earlier, we still have to make sure these models are behaving the way we want them to. So kind of finding that sweet spot between embracing technology, but while still being skeptical of the technology is the only way you're going to get from bad data and kind of troubled spots to the outcomes you're really looking for. So that's kind of one element from a user perspective. The other portion, though, is a lot of these things obviously are more technologically driven, which means there's some skill sets that we will need to have access to, whether they're sitting within the four walls of our plant or if they're sitting somewhere else but supporting it. There's just a higher need to be able to have people who understand OT data, OT systems, and how factories really work that are helping support these new kind of fancy AI-driven systems that we're using today. So there's a whole kind of support structure that previously I would rely on like an OT system engineer to take care of everything. If you knew how to write some PLC code, you know how a SCADA worked, we were probably okay. Now that's going to shift a little bit, and we have to be very mindful of it's not just the broad technology, but there's also the need for that manufacturing context to understand how to maintain these systems properly. So I'd say from both the user and the support, there's a different shift you have to think about from the way we attract and retain our talent.
Thank you again for joining me for this podcast, Tim. I know this is really early in the use of agentic AI in manufacturing, so I'm sure there's lots for us to talk about moving forward as things actually start getting implemented more. So I look forward to talking with you again. And thanks, of course, to all of our listeners. And please keep watching this space for more installments of Automation World Get Your Questions Answered. And remember, you can find us online at automationworld.com to stay on top of the latest industrial automation technology insights, trends, and news.